What's up, everyone? Robbie Gould here, and I am kicking it with an Ivy Leaguer. She is the captain of the Cornell track and field team as a heptathlete. God bless her. I can't do 7 events, that's for sure. She currently works for ESPN as a radio host and TV personality. Her distinguished list of honors are pretty long, but just to mention a few, she's a Peabody Award winner. She's a 2-time Gracie Award winner, a Sports Emmy Award winner, and a diehard Cubs fan, so she's good in my book. Sarah Spain, thanks for kicking it with me.
Well, I've been trying to kick it with you for years, but literally I've been trying you to teach me how to kick field goals for years, and we never made it happen. We were always go back and forth. So this is like, the offer still stands for you to give me the tips. So
I would love to do it. It's funny, as I remember doing an interview with you, sitting in like a conference room, trying to teach you how to kick with like this big, huge, long, literally conference table. This is when you just first had probably started out and you were working at ESPN. But I remember that. And then I always run into you as a diehard Cubs fan out at spring training in Arizona. So that was a lot of fun. So I want to take you back a little bit, though. I want to take you back to your Ivy League days. First of all, what was it like going to an Ivy League school like Cornell?
It was wonderful. I really had such a fantastic experience. And, when I was in high school, I played basketball, field hockey, and track. I got recruited for all of them. And so it sort of was like, where do I want to go and what do I want to do? And I think the big thing for me was I wanted to go to the best school possible because I knew that none of those things was I going to, go to the Olympics in or something. So I wanted to keep competing, but I also wanted to prioritize academics. And then I really wanted to go to Dartmouth and I didn't get in. And so I was like, okay, I'll go to Cornell. And then I'm having the best.
Oh, it's so hard. I know. What Ivy League school am I going to go to? This is so horrible.
But yeah, one thing that was really cool about track that even though it's, an indoor season and an outdoor season, so it's essentially the entire year you're training or competing. In a pinch, I could practice own separately at a different time if I really needed to for school, and all the competitions are on the weekends. So, you're not having to miss out on a team practice or traveling midweek. So it made it a little easier to balance like schoolwork because we don't give, athletic scholarships are not allowed in the league. So you don't get to just coast your way through. There's no gentleman's grades at Cornell. Like you got to show up and do your work. So, but I had a blast.
My question to you is you do all of these events, you graduate with an Ivy League degree in English, and I feel like your career has been this fearlessness and open for any opportunity and every opportunity. You moved to LA to start doing improv and acting, and you want to be, and a dream job would be to be on SNL. Tell me, you leave Cornell, you go to LA, hey, let's figure this out. Like what were you thinking and what were you going through?
Well, I grew up always wanting to do Saturday Night Live, be on Broadway, or be like a performer of some kind. But I never got to fully dive into it because of sports. I was doing sports year round, and then in the summer, AAU nationals for track and field hockey, AAU for basketball. So I was just really limited in the other stuff I got to do. I was all-state in band and chorus. So
don't laugh. I played the drums and the trumpet when I was in high school. The drum was way bigger than me. I played the big bass. So
nice.
I'm walking down in this nice purple outfit with a bass
band.
Unbelievable.
That's awesome. I like that. So like I did all stuff. I did talent show, but I couldn't be in the school plays because it's the same time as practice. Same goes for Cornell. Like when I got there, I auditioned for an a cappella group and through all the 3 days of tryouts, made it. And then they were like, by the way, we're switching everything to Saturdays. And I'm like, see ya. That's when I have track. So it kept feeling like it was a conflict. And I knew I had such a limited time to do sports that I wanted to like do all the sports. And then if the acting and the comedy was the career I wanted to pursue it. That's why I moved to LA to just like full-fledgedly try it. And I loved Second City. I did the whole conservatory there. I loved that. But when I dabbled in mixing the entertainment side with sports, that's when everything started to pick up. And I was like, maybe I should have been doing this all along. Like take the two things I love and put together.
So what did you take away from improv in your acting career that you now are able to utilize, whether it's communication or whether it's in telling a story in short form so that everyone can grasp the concept and description of what you're talking about? What did you take away that's kind of helped you in your career as you've moved forward from WGN to now ESPN?
I would say one of the biggest things is listening. And it sounds really obvious, but one of the things that like kills me when I'm watching someone moderate a panel or do an interview is when you can tell they're just like waiting to get to the next question they had planned instead of listening to what the person said. So then, but wait, they just said something crazy, like follow up on that. And they're not listening. And so in improv, the whole thing is listening. Like you have nothing to work with except for whatever the people in your scene just said. And you have to remember where they said you are, what your relationship is to each other, like what they're doing, what the activity is. And if you're not listening, the whole scene's ruined. And so like really being able to play off of something that someone else says and listening carefully. And then I think also, you know, my first job in Chicago was a startup website that was supposed to be like kind of no spin, voice of the athlete. Like you got to hear from people more their personality than trying to break news. And so I went into things with a totally different attitude than a usual reporter. Like when Carlos Zambrano of the Cubs destroyed the Gatorade cooler at Wrigley, I went around and did interviews with everyone on the team asking what it would be like to have the cooler on the DL and how come he's always kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time. What's it going to do to your hydration, and made them all like interact with me as if it was a person. And it was much funnier than just like, why does Carlos Zambrano have a hot head? Went and did Peanut Tillman from the Bears charity event, flag football game. And instead of the usual, like, why are you so thankful to your team to show up and help you with this charity? I instead like mic'd him up and auditioned for the Bears as a wide receiver, because it was when Devin Hester was going to be the number 1 wide receiver going into the season, which was a little dicey. So I was like,
that's so mean. That's my teammate. I love him to death.
Well, Devin Hester is ridiculous, clearly, but maybe not as a wide receiver. So I, you know, mic'd myself up and had Peanut tell me what routes to run and throw the ball and just make fun of me. And so that's all kind of bringing that improv, create a scene, create a scenario, bring some totally different energy to an interview than just a straight one. And so it's huge for me in starting my career in Chicago and kind of getting people to be like, ooh, I like this girl. Like she gets to know the athletes and brings out their personalities so that we can, know better.
What I'd love to know about the personalities, specifically in going into these interviews, is everyone has a different personality. Everyone has a different background. Everyone, you have to do a little research, obviously, on what you're doing. Tell me about the mindset you go into these interviews and to the industry that you're in. Obviously, you've been very successful. You have TV shows, you have radio shows, you're a writer. Like, this is unbelievable, the things that you're doing. Now, you don't like to sit still, but tell me the mindset you've taken into to your career and what's really carried you on throughout your time at ESPN.
It's a really good question. And no one ever asked me that before about like figuring out people's personalities. It's scary, especially because I didn't go to school for journalism, right? I didn't, like, so many of my colleagues went to Syracuse or Northwestern, or so then they come in having taken classes in, going into a locker room, and then they'll go practice at like a minor league team. I didn't have any of that. So I moved back to Chicago after trying to do comedy and acting, and my job immediately sends me into the locker room for the Blackhawks and the Cubs, and like massive market, massive teams, and kind of just figure it out. And so particularly with the Blackhawks, first of all, I love hockey guys. Hockey guys are great. They're just good interviews. They're funny. They're really down to earth. But I walked in there, and first of all, I don't even know who half of them are, right? I just moved back from LA. The Blackhawks had not won any Stanley Cups. So like and then there's like a bunch of foreign dudes that are like not fully, so I'm just like, I don't know who to like lean on for personality. And thankfully there were just some really big, bold personalities. The first year I was in there, I found out that Chris Versteeg could do karaoke without looking at a screen. He could, and so I ended up asking him in the locker room to give me a little, thinking he wouldn't, and he full on starts singing Fergie Glamorous, full locker room watching. And
now, did you bring out your singing and do the duet with him at the same time, or no?
I didn't steal focus from him. That was things I had to learn being a performer. Is like, it's not about you, Sarah. That took some time, still working on it. But yeah. So it was like for the Cubs, massive difference between walking up to Ryan Dempster and telling him I want to do kind of a back and forth where the Gatorade cooler's on the DL, and he's like, all right, I'm in. So funny, back and forth. And then
he's the best, isn't he?
Yeah, he's the best, yeah. And he's like built for that. And then you get other people, and you're like, well, this is not going to air. Like this person doesn't have the back and forth, or they hate me. Like there was one Cubs player that like I remember Conan O'Brien came to the clubhouse to do when Conan was like starting his new show, and he did a thing where he was going across America, and he came to Wrigley Field the day that I was there. So I ended up happening to be standing with him and Reed Johnson, and someone took a photograph and gave it to me. So I printed one out. Like I went to Walgreens and like it to him. I was like, oh, I didn't know if you wanted this photo of you and Conan. And he was like, what? And I was like, I just didn't know. And he was like, yeah, no, I'm good. And I was like, I'm at, and like every time I tried to talk to him, I was like, man, Reed Johnson hates me. I have no idea why, but like this guy's not going to play the game. So, you know, you kind of have to get a feel for who, especially if you're doing more silly stuff, who's okay with that and who's like, this is my job, go away, lady. Like, I'll tell you how I feel about how many goals I'm scoring or like my batting average. But other than that, like, I'm good.
I want to talk about your career, and I want to talk about you had an opportunity to be at WGN and TV and digital, and then you made the switch to radio at ESPN. It might not have been, you know, the dream job that you potentially thought it would be, but it gave you a different path. Why did you choose the ESPN path in radio? And listen, you've been extremely successful in this. Like, think about what you're doing right now. You're on 2 shows around the horn. I mean, highly questionable. You write your books. You have That's What She Said podcast. I mean, you're like, it's never ending for you. So is that something that you saw might be opening the doors for these? Or is it something that you're like, you know what, let me try something different and I'm open to every opportunity?
I've been pretty open, but once I decided to switch into sports, it was near the end of my time in LA, is when I thought, okay, things are like clicking now. Like, I'd done a couple little small TV pilots or like little things on the acting side, and the improv had gone well, but I wasn't ready to fully, like, you know, go on a cruise as part of the Second City cast and then like just do that. So I was kind of in the, and then when I added sports into the mix, it started to feel like, oh, okay, this is a space where I can thrive. So I moved back to Chicago for that startup website. And that's when I started to make more decisions. Cause I got a job on WGN called Chicago's Best that wasn't sports. It was co-hosting a TV show. It's actually still on, but co-hosting a TV show to different like restaurants or ice cream shops or record shops and show people the places around Chicago. And then I was doing a radio show at WGN that kind of coincided. That's when ESPN needed a new anchor person. And so it was the really big decision to like, do I want to full-fledgedly try for sports and give up the other stuff? And it's ESPN, worldwide leader. And it was clearly the first step toward trying to, you know, do more at the company. So it was a bit of a risk, but it clearly paid off. And I think once I got into sports and realized how much I could bring my sort of comedy sensibilities, but also could make a difference in terms of the voices that people heard, that mattered to me too. Because ESPN hadn't had a woman on the air every day in Chicago for 11 years. It hadn't been since Peggy Kaczynski was an update anchor, who I'm sure you know. So there was also a little part of me that's always been like, cared about that stuff and giving people someone to look up to. So it felt cool to have that opportunity.
Yeah, and I know you're big into being a mentor. You obviously work for ESPNW as well, and you're beginning to be a pioneer for women in the media industry. I mean, if you think about the things you're doing and this, you know, stages you can set for other women in the industry, you know, why is that so important to you?
Well, when I moved back to Chicago and I was in those locker rooms, all the stuff that you hear about happened, all the stuff. And I had read about it when I got in sports, and I had wondered if I would be immune to it. Cause, you know, oh, I'm an athlete and I'm 6 feet tall. I'm going to walk in. They're going to know that like I was an athlete and went to an Ivy school. I was an English major. Like I clearly have all the like bona fides to show up and not be treated like trash. And that was not the case. And so, you know, in the Blackhawks locker room, I was only in there for a couple weeks. I don't think anybody even knew my name yet as far as the players go. And a friend of mine told me that he had heard from Blackhawks. One of the older writers had gone to the PR staff and said that I must be sleeping with the players because they were giving me better answers. And again, I'd only been in there a couple of weeks. I was 28. So like they were talking to me like a normal person. And I was asking different questions because I was coming from a different background than they were. And so that was really hard and frustrating. The Cubs, early on in my career, I was in the locker room and I had made friends with her who was in the kind of back of house stuff. And she said they had a conversation about what were they going to do about me because my boobs were distracting in the locker room. And thankfully she was in there and she was like, well, what's she supposed to do? Like hang them up outside and then pick them up on her way back home? Like she can't put them away. You know, and I wasn't wearing inappropriate things. It was just the idea that there was a young woman and there were almost no women in there. There was one very long time veteran Cubs reporter who's a woman who was in the locker room, and that's it. Every day it was just a bunch of dudes and me. So that kind of stuff that you kind of think is antiquated and fashioned, and then to actually run up against it. I had an assignment for a Chicago Tribune story on different Chicago athlete nicknames, and the weren't going to let me come to their practice. And when my editor followed up, they said, well, we've just heard some things about what she wears to cover. And he was like, she's not been to your practices, and who are you hearing this from? So like suddenly I'm being talked about in the circles of Chicago sports without knowing about it. And also, again, without dressing, I wasn't dressing inappropriately. I got a big rack of lamb. Like there's nothing there's nothing I can do about it. So it was really frustrating. And then they had to like be, okay, we'll let her come. And then I go, but like, even in that moment, you're doing the interviews and you're so cautious of like, aware of the fact that people are watching you. And again, I'm not some rando off the street. Like, you know what I mean? Like I'd been working at this job. And so it was really frustrating. And it was very validating when, a couple months to a year later, people are walking up, oh, I saw you on Oberman's show, or I saw you on SportsCenter, I saw this, you did a great job. And I'm like, well, yeah, like I've never been some like nitwit that showed up, without, big goals in mind. It just assumed things about me before getting to know me. So I think, that part was really frustrating. And so because I went through all that, I wanted to not just go through it and then ignore it. I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to bring attention to it. And I wanted to make it so that other women in the industry who followed me wouldn't have the same issue, because I needed a mentor in like a longtime radio guy in Chicago to tell me like, stick with it. Don't let it get you down. Keep working hard. Eventually, like you'll be in a position where they can't say no. They can't turn you away from the locker room. They can't, reject you when you want to come do stories. And that is now. But I don't want other people to have to go through that first.
Yeah, that's incredible. Tell me now, you talked about your mentor. Obviously, as athletes, we have people that, we've followed or that we've looked up to and things like that. You're talking about your mentor that helped you through these situations. As athletes, we go through training. We're given like a presentation. Obviously, women are going to be in there, respect everybody, go through that. I've always come from the sense that, no matter what the interview is, who it's coming from, everyone has a job to do. It doesn't matter, any background, whatever it may be. So tell me what this mentor or your mentors have helped you to set you up with these type of situations.
Well, so that guy, Steve Cochran, has been in like the news radio side of Chicago forever. When I first moved back, he I don't even know how we first got in, but he had me on his radio show occasionally for something called Stump the Spain, where people had to call in and try to beat me in sports trivia, but he gave me all the answers. Because I told him
You're undefeated?
Never lost. Because I told him, I'm like, okay, well, trivia is not like, that's not my thing. If someone wants like who hit the most home runs in 1980, I'm going to be like, I don't know. I wasn't born yet. But he just liked the idea of this very sassy and sarcastic and just like telling people what was up. And he just liked having people be humbled by it so that they would be willing to welcome more women in. And so it was like, he became this guy who I could go to and say, like, I'm new to in this. Cause I grew up in Lake Forest, but I had never lived in downtown Chicago and done work there where I was like surrounded by all these people in the industry. He'd been around forever. So I could just come to him with like stuff and he could say, stick with it. Don't let them get you down. Like, you got this. And then when I got to ESPN, I have so many of them. Anybody from like Jamel Hill, who, when she first met me at an ESPNW like summit conference, she was like, why are you not on TV? I'm like, well, I haven't done enough TV. So like, they don't know if they could trust me. And she's like, all right, next time I'm on vacation, you're hosting my show. And I was like, okay. And then like 2 months, her producers were like, Jamel's going on vacation. She said, you're going to host for her. And I'm like, what?
Okay.
I mean, I'm hosting like a live hour-long show on ESPN, and she totally trusted me and lifted me up. And then she just was always prepared and knowledgeable and like set this great example. And she's still a massive influence to me. But I have a ton. Dan Lebitard is a huge mentor of mine, just in terms of, first of all, being creative and bold and unique in your style, but also he knows he's like so knowledgeable, but when he doesn't know something, he just owns it. Like literally in the middle of the show, some like the New York Jets will come up and he'll be like, can anybody name 4 people on the Jets? Or like the Brooklyn Nets, he'll be like, does anyone know who coaches Brooklyn Nets? Like, it's the kind of thing that everyone assumes everyone in our industry knows everything. And it's just not possible. But if you're like really defensive about it, it'll drag you down. Whereas if you just own it and you're like, yeah, I don't know that. People are like, okay, how could you know everything? But I had to learn that from Dan.
That's incredible. I think one of the most incredible pieces I've ever seen you do has been a part of your Peabody Award. The More Than Mean campaign that was born out of the treatment that you and Julie DeCaro received on Twitter, and watching the men read those descriptions.
Mm-hmm.
How did this whole thing come about? And tell me the birth of that project.
So this guy, Brad Burke, masterminded it because he has a side project called Just Not Sports. It's like a podcast and sports adjacent. And he'd seen stories about the Twitter treatment, and he'd seen people kind of get really fired up after reading it and then forget about it. And he wanted to do something that brought like more lasting attention to it and was more visceral. So he was kind of basing it off the mean tweets for Jimmy Kimmel that are mean but mostly funny. Like the goal is to be funny. And he was like, I'm going to bring in a bunch of guys that think they're just reading mean tweets like that. And in the end, they're going to be the most awful things. And we weren't giving any direction. And what's fascinating about it is that both Julie and I recorded separately. They gave us no direction. They said, just sit there. The guys are going to read them to you. Say something if you want to, say nothing if you want to. And we both were like super stoic. And I think it's because we've just used to it. After years of that, you're like, yep, I remember someone saying that they hoped my husband would beat me and my dog would get hit by a car, or in her case, like the worst, like I hope you get raped again. Like that's what she gets on social media.
Yeah.
And so
it's so sad that that's even a conversation, you know?
But like our reactions to it were so stoic. Guys were super vulnerable. And I really think that's a big part of why that project stood out so much is people, unfortunately, either get used to or don't care when share their experiences and are vulnerable and upset about them, but they're not used to seeing men be on the brink of tears or be super emotional about this stuff. And these guys have seen these tweets before. So they're like, this is what you get just for like showing up and doing your job. And I really think that's a big part of the reason that people react the way they did to it. And then I was getting married 2 weeks later, so I only said yes because I'm like, this seems like a good project. And they said it will only take an hour or so. And then the next 2 weeks was like ABC is at my house, and I'm on every show, and like people all like Jared Leto and Brene Brown and famous people everywhere are tweeting about it, and it was pretty crazy.
I mean, think about that though. Think about what you just said, like the dynamic of this piece specifically that you're involved in, to the reach, to the learning, to the vulnerability. Like how good does that feel to bring that to a community of people, probably nationwide, if not internationally?
Huge. And the fact that it's years later now and people are always messaging and saying that they use it as curriculum in classes, right? Because I think like I said before, one of the things I just want to do is shine a light on stuff. I don't want to just digest it and take it and fight through and not share that it's happening to me, not share how I deal with it, and not make people realize the realities, because then the next person that comes along might think they're alone in that, right? Might not be able to get through it. And having those role models that help you figure out how you personally want to deal with it, whether you want to clap back or just mute people or block people, whether you like out them or make fun of their spelling or whatever it is. I think there's a really amazing writer, Lindy West. She actually inspired the show Shrill on Hulu based on her book. And she's given a lot of interviews about this because she had a troll that found out of her dad's passing and created accounts on every social media using her dad's name, and then would send her messages about how he's so disappointed in her and just the worst possible kind of thing. She tracked him down and got him to go on NPR with her and tell him about, like, who are you? Like, why do you do this? And he was like a normal dude with a girlfriend and family and a job, and like none of them knew that he was doing this. And in the end, he said he was mad at her for being a fat woman who was happy and who was like living her life without being apologetic for being overweight. And just when you hear something like that, it makes you also look at all the people doing things to you different. So I tend to feel sympathetic for them. And I sometimes even write them, I'm so sorry for whatever you're going through. Like no one who's happy would ever say this to a stranger. So I things get better for you. Because really, who's doing this? Like
I know.
Who's like sitting at home writing a bunch of strangers, you suck, I hate you, you're fat and ugly. Like,
do you know, it's interesting though, because athletes, we go through it all the time. And I'll never forget, if you miss a game-winning kick, if you miss one field goal, next thing you know, you're not winning their fantasy leagues. You know, it's interesting and it even goes down to like kids now. Kids are having phones at 10. They're going through this. Some kids are being cyberbullied. And, you know, I thought that was something that was eye-opening to me as a guy who has 3 kids is, okay, now I'm going through it as a dad. My wife handles it different. Like I have to teach them certain ways and understanding, like my kids know to be respectful. My kids know to respect everyone. But this is something that's an outside source that's coming in that I got to teach them. What would you give advice to younger kids that people who can hide behind, because it's not live. You can't see them face to face. These are people who are literally hiding behind social media tags. Tell me your advice for young kids or people that on how to deal with such hard topics like social media.
Yeah. Man, I mean, I don't have kids. And whenever I talk to people about like growing up in this age, it's the biggest thing is like, how do you deal with the influences of people that are not in, you can't control them. You don't even know them. And I feel so bad about the cyberbullying aspect of how it affects kids. One thing I would say is there are tons of resources and you should read them because the experts that are doing the studies on this can speak to some of the really weird and interesting ways that this affects kids, especially, the psychosomatic ways our body actually reacts to having conversations with people. So in person, like I can see your face and react to your eyes and your mouth and your body's moving and tell if what I'm saying is making you happy or sad or angry. And our natural body instinct, except for when we're in like a full-on fist fight, is to connect with someone that you're looking at. And that doesn't happen online. You can't see them. You can't hear them. There's nothing about them that's human to you. And so you stop having the natural instinct to connect and you just start, I don't care, because you can't tell what's happening on the other end.
It's so true.
And so being able to talk to kids about, and then like my Kate Fagan wrote a book about a really successful young girl at UPenn that ended up completing suicide and nobody had any idea she was unhappy. And one of the research aspects that she did was that collegiate people, students are really abnormally depressed now in recent years. And part of the reason is our brains actually react differently to talking in person, talking on the phone, or texting. So even a phone call will get your brain reacting. So if you call your mom and you can hear her voice, your brain does stuff. When you're talking in person, your brain does stuff. When you're texting, even if they say the exact same words, your brain doesn't move. So you don't have the same actual physical response to that interaction. Even if they say, I love you and you're going to be fine and whatever else, call me when you need me, it doesn't work the same. And we now use so much email and text instead of interacting with people in person. And we're just now learning all the ways it completely affects our happiness and our ability to interact. And so I would say learn all that stuff so that you can really intelligently discuss it. And then, figure out for you. Do you need to step away? Do you need someone else to read your comments and then tell you the ones that you need to know for work or something if you're older? If you're a kid, really, really dig down into how it makes them feel when someone is hurtful to them and tell them, why would you want that for someone else? Right. But it's so hard. It's because like, you just want to fit in and be like everyone else. And when you get older,
easier said than done, right?
Being like everyone else sucks. Be normal, be cool, be different. But like when you're young, that's hard to do.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. Okay. So give me some advice to your younger self. Like, what would you tell your younger self? What advice would you give to your younger self?
One I would say is to trust your instincts and to have a very thick skin and to know that if you continue to follow your gut instinct on stuff, you will get out on the right side of things, and to have a thick skin around the people and the elements of the industry that are going to try to beat you down and assume the worst. And the other thing I would say is, it's hard because whenever you try to rewrite history, you don't know if it's going to end up the same way. It's like Back to the Future. You don't want Marty's mom making out with her son or whatever. But but like I did some stuff early in my career because that's the way the industry looked at the time. Like I did this fantasy football online show where I got to write the content and like give advice on fantasy football, but I had to wear like football jerseys with like massive cleavage and like laces up the front and be like, hey guys, it's your fantasy sports girl, Sarah. Like just it's not me at all. And anybody who knows me knows I'm like very uncomfortable, like trying to be sexy. It's not I want people to laugh at me or hopefully with me. But I did that stuff because I looked out at the industry and it was like, unless you were Linda Cohn or Robin Roberts, then everybody else was women on the internet that would pop up in a corner of a blog you were reading and would be like, today's sports update, and like they always had tons of makeup and like cleavage, and I was like, okay, I guess that's how you get in if you're a woman, because I don't see women anywhere else doing anything. So I look back at that and it's frustrating now when someone will pull up a photo of me from like 15 years ago and be like, yeah, you're a real voice for women, like, yada yada. And I'm like, dude, what was I supposed to do? I was like a 20-something nobody that couldn't get my foot in the door, and everywhere I looked, that's what was being validated. And I think that's another reason I want to change the industry, is because it sucks to feel like And literally, if you start digging any number of the brilliant, could be Ivy League, could be like speaks 3 languages, could be whatever, in their past is some like pageant or, some job that they have is totally about being sexualized, because that's the only way to get in the industry. And until the people hiring aren't seeing that girl and being like, well, she looks smart, then you're not going to get the job. And so I want to go back and tell myself, don't do that crap. But it's hard because I don't actually know that I would have the jobs now if somebody hadn't seen me do those, brought me in, and then I'd proved myself as much more than just that crap. So I don't know. I tell myself that it's all going to work out okay, even during those awkward,
Well, I
make
think
sure
it's worked.
Find Robbie Gould. He's going to kick you right into last place.
Oh, that's incredible. So it's that's almost as good as Ryan Dempster's game-winning field goal conversation we had. Well, I just want to thank you for obviously being fearless. Thank you for always being open for opportunities outside of maybe your comfort zone and telling your stories to help inspire others. I think you've truly been an incredible friend. You've been awesome in setting a new standard for women in your industry. And I want to say thanks so much for kicking it with me, and looking forward to see what happens next for you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And thanks to you for always being good to us media folks who are just trying to do our jobs. And one day you are still going to teach me how to kick. I might be past my prime. I'm going to pull every muscle in my leg, but I'm still going to do it.
So am I. Don't worry about it. No worries.